When June's father discovered she was pregnant, he didn't ask who the father was. He just dragged her into the wilderness and gave her away like livestock. But the man he gave her to was what anyone expected. He didn't speak much, just pointed to the cabin door, then walked back toward the shed like she was no different from the sack of feed her father had left him along with her. June stood there, her wrists still red from the rope burn, her eyes swollen from the slap she hadn't seen coming. Her father hadn't given her a final word, only a grunt. Then he rode off back down the mountain trail without looking back. She was barely 17, barefoot in snow, belly beginning to swell, and now left in the middle of nowhere with a man twice her size who hadn't said a single word. The cabin door creaked open. Warmth hit her face. Feeble light danced from the hearth across the wooden floor. A cot in one corner, a rough table, a basin, hooks on the wall with furs, a shotgun over the mantel. Then she turned. It was gone. June stepped in slowly, the door shutting behind her by the wind's hand, not his. She sank down by the fire, clutching her arms around her middle. Her father hadn't asked who the father was. He hadn't asked anything. Just marched into her room, pulled her out by the hair, and stuffed her into the wagon. It's your shame, he'd growled. You'll live with it or die with it. You won't have your sin rotting this house. And then the ride, hours, no food, no stop, only snow and silence, and the sound of her own heart breaking in her ears. Now the only thing breaking was the firewood in the hearth. Then the sound of heavy boots coming back up the porch. She didn't move. He opened the door with a push of his shoulder, taller than she remembered. Broad shoulders under a wolf pelt, thick beard, dark eyes. He glanced at her once, just once, then walked to the fire, tossed down 2 rabbits, and started skinning them without a word. She stared at him. He didn't glance back. Finally, her voice cracked. "That's your name?" He didn't look up. He said, "Rock." Used that, a flat word. Then silence again, thick and awkward. Her fingers trembled in her lap. "What do you want from me?" she asked, staring now. Still no eye contact. He gutted one of the rabbits. "I didn't ask for you," he muttered. The words hit like a slap. June felt the sting in her chest, but she bit it down. She'd cried enough that morning. She wouldn't give him the tears now. She laid down on the floor beside the fire that night. He hadn't offered the cot and she didn't dare take it. Her hands curled around her belly. She hadn't told anyone yet, but she felt it already. The tiny fluttering inside her that didn't come from hunger or fear. The life growing in her. The only thing she had left. The next few days passed in silence. Rourke left before dawn, returned after dusk, always with meat or wood or both. She never saw where he went, only heard the sound of axe striking tree, gunfire in the woods, birds scattering. He never touched her, never asked questions, didn't even look at her long. June cleaned because she didn't know what else to do. Cooked what little she could, though her hands were clumsy from lack of practice. Her father hadn't let her near the hearth, said that was her mother's job till the day she died. It was on the 5th morning that she saw the blood. It stained the front of her dress when she woke. Her scream brought him in from outside, snow on his shoulders, axe in hand. "I'm bleeding," she whispered, voice shrill. "It's too early. You can't. You don't know." He moved fast, tossed the axe down, came to her side, looked once, then swept her up in his arms, and carried her to the cot without asking permission. She lay there shivering, whispering over and over, "Please not the baby. Please not the baby. Please not the baby." Rourke didn't speak, just stoked the fire hotter, then boiled water, then brought every fur in the cabin over to cover her. She saw his hands tremble once, just once, as he wrapped her legs and checked the bleeding. Hours passed. The blood slowed. The cramping stopped. She didn't lose it. He sat beside her that night on the floor, back to the wall, watching the fire with a face she couldn't read. "You cared," she whispered. He didn't blink. "Don't flatter yourself." But his voice cracked when he said it. She didn't say anything else. Just listened to the crackle of firewood and the soft, steady breath of the man who hadn't smiled once since she arrived, but had carried her like something breakable. By the 2nd week, she started to notice things. A second bowl placed beside his at dinner, even if he didn't offer it. A blanket folded near the hearth, new, clean, untouched, but left there for her. Hair boots stitched at the sole, mended without her asking. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind either. It was something else, something unreadable. Then came the storm. It roared down from the mountains like a beast, trapping them in the cabin for 5 days straight. Wind howled. Snow buried the porch. The fire stayed lit, but food ran low. They spoke only in essentials. Hand me that pot. There is a leak by the shutter. Eat this. It's warm. But that was on the third night after she slipped on the ice by the door, landing hard, that he finally raised his voice. What were you thinking going out like that? She winced, holding her elbow. I needed snow for water. I told you I'd get it. You were asleep. I grabbed the bandages and moved toward her. She flinched. I stopped cold. I'm not your father, he said, voice low. She looked up, startled. I crouched down gentler now. You don't flinch like that unless someone has made you expect a blow. She said nothing. I won't hit you, he muttered, even if you mouth off. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, You're the first man who's ever said that to me. Rourke didn't reply, just wrapped her arm carefully, his big hand strangely tender. That night, she sat on the cot instead of the floor. He didn't stop her, and when she cried, silent, slow, ashamed, he didn't speak, just sat in the dark, listening. It was the 6th week when the fever came. She woke chattering, the world spinning. Rourke's hand was on her forehead before she could call his name. He said nothing, just bolted to the door, saddled the mule, and vanished into the storm. He was gone those days. When he returned, his face was windburned, lips cracked, hands frozen near black, but he had herbs, glass, and something warm in a flask she didn't recognize. She sipped it and slept. When she woke again, the fever had broken. Rourke looked worse than her, gaunt, eyes dark with worry. She whispered, Why'd you come back? He blinked. She tried to smile. You could have let the fever do the work. He didn't laugh, just shook his head once. I'm not your father. That was all he said. But it was enough. The spring thaw came late, clawing its way down the mountain like something reluctant to wake. Moot swallowed the trail. Ise clung to the roof. The snows melted, but the cold lingered as if it too wasn't ready to leave. Rourke was gone longer each day now, trapping and foraging, carrying more than usual on his shoulders, though he barely spoke of it. Hune's belly grew quietly, a steady bloom beneath the folds of her threadbare dress. He didn't mention it. Didn't they ask how far along she was, but she saw the glances. The way his eyes dropped sometimes when she moved too fast or reached too high. He noticed. He always noticed even when he pretended not to. He didn't smile, not once, but he boiled her bath water now without being asked. Left bread by the hearth in the mornings. Took to carving little things, small animals mostly, and leaving them on the windowsill like they'd walked in by accident. Once she found a wooden bird, wings spread like it had just landed. He never said it was his. June didn't press, but she watched him closely now, trying to read the edges of the man who had no patience for conversation, but had carried her through fever, wrapped her wounds, mended her boots, and brought back wild flowers wrapped in bark as if by mistake. And still he said nothing about the child growing inside her until the day the dog followed him home. It was scraggly, half-starved, with a limp in its hind leg, and eyes as desperate as its ribs were sharp. Rourke found it near the trap line, snarled at him once, then collapsed at his feet. He brought it back without a word. Hune was the one who named it. Tinder, she said, stroking its matted fur by the fire that night. Cause he caught quick to the warmth. Rourke didn't argue. He just kept his back to her, sharpening his blade with long, deliberate strokes. But that night, when the wind whistled cold through the chimney, and the dog whimpered in its sleep, Rourke laid another pelt near the hearth. Said nothing, just nudged it closer. 3 days later, Tinder wouldn't leave June's side. Guess he's decided who he belongs to, she murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears as it leaned into her lap. Rourke didn't respond, but he didn't hide the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth either. That night, something changed. It began with a question. Rourke stood by the window after supper, staring out into the dark. June sat on the cot, rubbing her back. The silence had stretched too long, and the baby was kicking harder now, like it knew something had shifted. Then Rourke turned. "How far along are you?" he asked. She blinked. I never asked questions. Not like that. Not looking her full in the face. She swallowed. 6 months give or take. Nadie. Didn't sit. Just stood there as still as timber. Is the father gone? I asked slower this time. June's throat tightened. Her eyes dropped to her lap. I wasn't a father. Not really. I was the preacher's son. Rourke said nothing. He promised me he'd marry me. She went on, voice thinner now. Said he loved me. We met behind the schoolhouse every Thursday after choir. He thought it meant something. She laughed bitter. Turns out I meant less than nothing to him. When I told him I was late, he told his father I'd seduced him. Said I was trying to trap a man of God. She looked up. Do you know what my father did after that? Rourke's jaw worked slow, but his hands stayed loose at his sides. I'm sorry, he said quietly. June blinked. For what? For how they treated you. I didn't say it like a man trying to fix something. I said it like he understood it couldn't be undone. She stared at him a long moment. Then why'd you take me? I hesitated. I owed your father. That stung. She looked away. I saved my life once, Rourke continued. Years ago, pulled me out of a river I'd fallen through. He was drunk, stupid. He never let me forget it. So, he gave you a girl in exchange. Her voice cracked. A pregnant one, no less. I didn't know, Rourke said. He said he had someone who needed a place. Said she was difficult. June let the word burn through her. He went on. I didn't ask questions. Figured it'd be another mouth, another hand for cooking. Then I saw your face, the bruises, the way you held your arms. That was difficult. That was abandoned. Silence fell again. Only this time it did ache. It settled. That night she dreamed of rivers and ice and a man lifting her from freezing water. Not because he owed anything, but because he couldn't bear to let her drown. The baby came early. It started with cramps, tight, sharp. June bit down on the pain until her lip bled. She didn't want to scream. Didn't they want to wake him? But the water broke before dawn and her body gave her no choice. Rourke was at her side in seconds. He didn't ask what to do. He just did it. Boiled water, laid out towels, built the fire higher, cleared the floor. He moved like a man who'd helped bring life into the world before, but she knew he hadn't. She was too far gone to question it. The pain was unbearable, a storm tearing through her bones. She screamed once, then twice, then didn't care how many times after that. Rourke held her hand, let her crush his fingers, whispered things that didn't make sense, but helped anyway. Almost there. You're strong. It's almost here. She laughed through tears. How do you know it's a he? I don't, he said. Just feels like one. But when the baby came, red and wet and howling with a rage only new life knows. It wasn't a boy. It was a girl. Teeny, perfect, with dark hair and fists curled like stars. June sobbed it. Not from pain now, from something deeper, something whole. Rourke cut the cord, wrapped the child, handed her over like she was a miracle. He didn't smile, but his eyes were glassy when he looked at them both. What will you name her? He asked. June looked down. Ope. Nadie. She's everything I didn't think I'd get to have. She looked up and I wouldn't have her without you. He shook his head. You'd have survived. No, she whispered. Not like this. Rourke didn't answer. But that night, as the baby slept in June's arms, he dragged the cot closer to the hearth, sat down a second chair, and sat beside them. All night, listening to the wind hush against the windows, listening to Hope's soft breath. 3 days later, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't loud, just 2 raps measured intentional. Rourke was sharpening his blade. Hune was swaddling the baby. Both froze. "Who'd come this far?" she whispered. He didn't reply. Rourke stood close to the door and opened it slow. On the porch stood a boy. 15, maybe 16, thin mud on his boots. He held his head in his hands. "Sir," he said. "You work?" "Yes." The boy's voice cracked. "You got a girl here named June?" Rourke's hand twitched near the door frame. "Was asking?" The boy licked his lips. "I'm her brother." Hune stood so fast the chair toppled. "What?" The boy craned his neck, eyes lighting when he saw her. "Hune, they said you were dead." Hune's breath left her body. She stepped out into the snow barefoot, child still in her arms. "I don't understand," she whispered. The boy stepped forward. "Father told the town you ran off. Said you'd shamed us and were probably in the river by now. But then Ma got sick. She told me the truth. Told me where he took you." Rourke's jaw was clenched. "Why come now?" he asked. The boy swallowed. "Cause it was gone. Left in the night after the sheriff started asking about the preacher's son and some hush money. The town's turning. People are asking questions. And Mama said to find June. Said to bring her home if I could." Hune shook her head stunned. "Home?" She looked at the baby at work. Then whispered, "I already am." The boy, his name was Seth, slept curled up near the hearth that night, boots off, coat folded over his head, too afraid to ask for a real place to sleep, but too tired to fight it. Rourke didn't push him. Hune didn't either. She had too many thoughts spinning in her head, and none of them were ready to land. She lay on the cot with hope pressed to her chest, feeling the baby's breath rise against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the boy. It was so thin, dirt beneath his fingernails, a tear in one elbow. He'd made that journey on foot, alone in snow that hadn't fully melted. June couldn't imagine how far he'd walk to find her. But she also couldn't imagine going back. Not to that house, not to that town, not to the world that spat her out like spoiled milk. It was different now. She had hope. She had quiet. She had Rourke. And she had no idea where she stood with him. Rourke had barely said 3 words since the boy arrived. He'd gone back to his routine, cleaning, chopping wood, checking traps. But something was wound tighter in his shoulders now. Something guarded in the way he watched June and Seth when he thought they weren't looking. He didn't ask her what she planned to do. But he didn't need to. The choice was circling her all night, scratching at her brain like a restless bird. Could she go back? Was it even safe? What if the people had truly turned against her father? What if they hadn't? What if the whispers about the preacher's son reached the wrong ears and they turned it all back on her again? And what about Rourke? He hadn't said much about the child, but he'd stayed. They helped. They carved a cradle. She'd found it behind the cabin, half-finished-ish, made from pine wood and patience. The man who'd once only grunted at her now made her tea when she woke in the night. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it stayed in his eyes even after his lips had returned to a frown. She didn't want to lose that. Didn't they want to lose him? The next morning, the boy woke early, rubbing his eyes and looking around like he half expected to find it had all been a dream. He sat stiff at the table while June boiled oats. Ope was bundled close against her chest, twitching every now and then in newborn sleep. Sis cleared his throat. Mama's sick. Hune paused. What kind of sick? Hair lungs. Sis coughing up dark stuff. They say she won't last till summer unless she gets help. Hune turned from the stove and you came here alone. Nadie. Didn't they have no choice? We ain't got money for doctors. And Mama kept saying she needed to see you again. Said she needed to ask your forgiveness before he trailed off. Hune sat down slowly, heart pounding. The anger she'd carried for months tried to rise, but it was smothered by something heavier. Grief maybe, or something softer, something tired. Why didn't she stop him? She whispered when he beat me, when he gave me away like I was cattle. She tried. I swear she did, Seth said, his voice small. Bate, he told her if she ever spoke against him, he'd send her off same as he did you. And mama, she ain't strong like you. June's jaw clenched. I wasn't strong. I just got lucky. No, Seth said, you got out. Rourke stepped in then, shaking off snow, arms heavy with kindling. Seth tried to rise, but it was smothered by something heavier. Grief maybe, or something softer, something tired. Why didn't she stop him? She whispered when he beat me, when he gave me away like I was cattle. She tried. I swear she did, Seth said, his voice small. Bate, he told her if she ever spoke against him, he'd send her off same as he did you. And mama, she ain't strong like you. June's jaw clenched. I wasn't strong. I just got lucky. No, Seth said, you got out. Rourke stepped in then, shaking off snow, arms heavy with kindling. Said nothing. Used set the wood near the hearth and knelt to feed the fire. June looked at him. Did you hear? Nodded once. She studied his face. There was something hidden behind those dark eyes. Not judgment, not hope. Something like a wall built long ago, stone by stone. I don't know what to do, she said. You don't have to decide now, Roar replied. But she did, because in that moment, she realized something about herself, about everything that had happened since the day her father threw her on that wagon like a sack of grain. She hadn't just survived. She'd changed. Hardened, yes, but not in the way he'd meant her to. She was no longer someone else's problem. She was a mother now, and mothers don't run. That night, she packed a small bag, enough clothes for a few days. Rourke gave her one of his coats. It drowned her, but she took it anyway. It didn't say much while she wrapped Hope in blankets, just hovered near the door like he was waiting for the last moment. Seth had already saddled one of Rourke's mules. Their journey back to town would take a full day if they hurried, maybe longer with a newborn. I won't stay long, June said quietly. Used long enough to see her. Long enough to know the truth. Roar nodded. Do you need anything? She stepped closer. No. There was a silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they might still say later. Then, just before she turned to leave, he said, "You come back." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. She squeezed his hand. I will. The road was worse than she remembered. Frozen ruts still lined parts of the trail, and the mule struggled under the weight of the three of them. June took turns walking to ease the burden, clutching Hope to her chest beneath the folds of Rourke's coat. They arrived on the second morning when the sun was just beginning to burn through the clouds. The town hadn't changed. Not really. It still smelled like sawdust, and horses still carried that low hum of whispers waiting to erupt into shouts.